Here's something about the American economy that is absolutely guaranteed to work, every single month, without fail. Whatever you paid for groceries, gas, rent, and your car payment last month, you are almost certainly going to pay more for them next month. That's the one bet that has never let anyone down in years. Prices going up is the only reliable thing left in this economy, and that should terrify you, because it means the squeeze on your wallet isn't a glitch, it's the system working exactly the way it now works. The state of the United States economy is a genuine mess right now, and in today's video we're going to lay out the stats, the signs, the warnings, and the forecasts that prove it. Over the past several years, the financial life of the average American household has quietly come apart at the seams. You survived a pandemic, you survived the worst inflation in 4 decades, and just when you were told the worst was behind you, prices started climbing again. Your paycheck feels smaller, your savings account is thinner, your credit card balance is heavier, and no matter how many "the economy is strong" headlines you read, your own bank statement keeps telling you a different story. You are not imagining it, and you are not alone. Consumers all across this country are losing confidence, cutting back, and bracing for impact. Young Americans are watching the dream of owning a home, raising a family, and retiring with dignity slip further out of reach with every passing year. Small business owners are nervous. Economists are arguing about how bad it's going to get, not whether it's going to get bad. So today we've gathered the numbers that show, in plain black and white, just how far off the rails things have gone. But before we get into the list, do us one quick favor. Hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next, because the story we're about to tell is only going to get more important from here. Now, without further ado, here are 15 very surprising facts about the messed up state of the American economy. Number 1. The engine of the economy has all but stalled. Let's start with the big picture, because the big picture sets the stage for everything else. Gross domestic product. The total value of every good and service this country produces is the single broadest measure of whether the economy is growing or shrinking. And right now, it is barely moving. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, real GDP grew at an annual rate of just 1.6% in the first quarter of 2026. That number matters for 2 reasons. First, the government revised it down from its initial estimate of 2.0%, and the reason it cut the figure was telling: weaker business investment and weaker consumer spending than they first thought. In other words, when they looked closer, you and your neighbors were spending less than the optimists had assumed. Second, and more importantly, look at where we're coming from. In the fourth quarter of 2025, the economy grew a pathetic 0.5%. That is the kind of number you see right before the wheels come off. A coin flip's worth of growth. So yes, the first quarter of 2026 was technically an improvement, but improving from near zero to barely above crawling is not the comeback story the headlines want you to believe. This is an economy running on fumes, propped up almost entirely by a handful of massive technology companies pouring money into artificial intelligence data centers. Strip out that spending, and the picture for the ordinary American economy, the part you actually live in, is far weaker than the top-line number suggests. When the broadest measure of national prosperity can barely keep its head above water, every household downstream feels it, and you are downstream. Number 2. Top economists are openly putting the odds of a recession near a coin flip. Here is a question that should keep you up at night. What do the people whose entire job is to forecast the economy actually think is coming? Because they are not nearly as calm as the cheerful headlines would have you believe. Mark Zandi, the chief economist at Moody's Analytics, one of the most respected forecasters in the country, reset his recession probability for the next 12 months at 49%. Let that sink in, a nearly 1 in 2 chance of a recession, from a man who is normally cautious about even saying the word out loud. And he warned it could easily cross 50% if energy prices stay elevated. Gregory Dacko, the chief economist at EY Parthenon, pegs the odds at 40%, with the risk rising every time geopolitical tensions flare up. Even the famously optimistic Wall Street giants are hedging. Goldman Sachs spent the spring raising its recession odds to 30% as oil prices surged, before walking them back. JP Morgan put it bluntly, saying that while they no longer see an outright recession as the base case, they expect, and these are their words, material headwinds to keep growth weak through the rest of this year. Read that again. The most powerful bank in America is telling you the best-case scenario is a weak economy, not a healthy one. So when someone tells you everything is fine, ask them why the professionals are quoting you, odds that sound like a Vegas sports book. A near coin flip chance of recession is not a forecast of strength. It's a warning siren, and it's been getting louder all year. Number 3. Inflation is not dead. It came roaring back. Remember when you were promised that inflation was beaten, tamed, conquered, sent back to where it came from? That promise did not survive 2026. In May, the Consumer Price Index rose 4.2% compared to a year earlier. That is the fastest annual pace of inflation in more than 3 years, the worst reading since April of 2023. After all the interest rate hikes, all the pain, all the "we're getting it under control" speeches, inflation didn't just stop falling, it reversed and started climbing again, right back over 4%. The biggest driver was energy. Energy prices jumped 3.9% in a single month, and were up a staggering 23.5% over the year. Gasoline alone climbed 7% in May and sat more than 40% higher than it was a year before. If you felt that gut punch every time you fill your tank, the data confirms you're not crazy. And it wasn't just energy shelter inflation ticked up, and food inflation accelerated too. Here's why this should worry you even more than the number itself. When inflation falls and then climbs back up, it tells you the underlying problem was never actually fixed, it was just temporarily masked. It means the Federal Reserve is now stuck in an impossible position. Cut interest rates to help the weakening economy, and you risk pouring gasoline on the inflation fire. Keep rates high to fight inflation, and you risk choking off what little growth is left. There is no clean way out of that box, and you, the consumer, are the one trapped inside it, paying more for everything while the people in charge debate which mistake to make. Number 4. Americans have run out of savings. If you want to understand why so many households feel like they're one bad week away from disaster, look no further than the savings rate and prepare to be alarmed. In April 2026, the personal saving rate in the United States fell to just 2.6%, down from 3.2% the month before, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. To put that in perspective, a healthy, financially secure population saves somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 9% of its income. Americans are now saving barely a quarter of that. Out of every dollar of after-tax income, the typical household is setting aside less than 3 cents. This is what the slow-motion erosion of a middle class actually looks like in the data. It means that for millions of families, the cushion is gone. The emergency fund that's supposed to catch you when the car breaks down, when the medical bill arrives, when the hours get cut for a huge share of the country, that cushion has been spent down to nothing, swallowed by the rising cost of simply getting through the month. And think about what it means that the saving rate is still falling. People aren't choosing to save less because they feel rich and carefree. They're saving less because the gap between what they earn and what they have to spend keeps widening, and savings are the first casualty. When a nation stops saving, it stops building wealth, it stops investing in its own future, and it becomes dangerously fragile because the next shock, whenever it comes, lands on people who have nothing left in reserve to absorb it. Number 5. Your paycheck is shrinking, even when your boss gives you a raise. Here's one of the cruelest tricks this economy is playing on you right now. You can get a raise and still be getting poorer. It sounds impossible, but the math is brutally simple. In May 2026, average wages rose about 3.4% over the year. Sounds decent, right? Except inflation over that same period ran at 4.2%. When prices climb faster than your pay, your real wages, what your money can actually buy, go down. And in May, real earnings fell 0.8%. That was the second consecutive month that pay growth lagged behind inflation. So even though the number on your paycheck went up, the life that paycheck can buy got smaller. This is the quiet thief in the American economy. It doesn't show up as a pay cut on your stub, so it's easy to miss. But every month that inflation outpaces wages, you can afford a little less food, a little less gas, a little less of everything, no matter how hard you work. Economists at the Federal Reserve flagged that in the first quarter of 2026, the most reliable measures of real pay actually declined, falling for the first time since 2022, back when inflation was at its absolute worst. And it's wildly uneven. If you happen to work in tech, finance, or healthcare, your wages may have outrun inflation just fine. But if you work in retail, food service, education, or any of the jobs that actually keep this country running day to day, you've been falling behind. The people with the least margin for error are the ones losing ground the fastest. That is not an economy that's working. That's an economy quietly redistributing pain to the people who can least afford it. And that might be you. Number 6. Consumer confidence just hit a record low. You can argue about GDP numbers and inflation statistics all day long, but there is one number that captures something the spreadsheets can't: how Americans actually feel about their own financial future. And by that measure, the country is in a darker mood than at almost any point in modern history. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index, The gold standard survey that's been tracking the national mood since the 1950s fell to an all-time record low of 44.8 in May 2026. Not a low for the year, not a low for the decade, the lowest reading ever recorded in the entire history of the survey. It recovered slightly in early June to 48.9, helped by a brief dip in gas prices, but make no mistake, that's a dead cat bounce off rock bottom. Sentiment in June still sat roughly 19% below where it was just a year earlier. And when researchers asked people why they felt so grim, the answer was overwhelming and unanimous. 57% of consumers, without even being prompted, brought up high prices as the thing eroding their personal finances. Not the stock market, not abstract economic theory. The cost of living. The price of being alive in America right now. This matters far beyond hurt feelings, because confidence is not just a mood, it's a force. When people are scared about the future, they stop spending. They cancel the vacation. They delay the purchase. They hold on to every dollar a little tighter. And in an economy where consumer spending makes up roughly 70% of all activity, a frightened consumer is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Fear becomes the recession. And right now, the American consumer is more frightened than they have ever been in recorded history. Number 7. Everything at the grocery store is getting more expensive, and beef is leading the charge. Let's talk about the one bill you absolutely cannot escape. Food. You can skip a vacation, delay a car purchase, cancel a streaming subscription. You cannot stop eating. And the grocery store has become a monthly reminder of just how much ground your dollar has lost. Food prices rose 3.1% over the year, heading into the summer of 2026, with the pace accelerating. But the real shock is in the meat aisle. Beef and veal prices are projected to climb a staggering 12.1% in 2026, with some forecasts running as high as 18%. The reason is structural and not going away anytime soon. The American cattle herd is now the smallest it has been in decades. Years of drought, brutal feed costs, and razor-thin margins have driven ranchers out of the business, and you cannot rebuild a cattle herd overnight. Fewer cattle means record-high prices at the meat counter, and that's baked in for a while. It's not just beef. Coffee and other beverages are forecast to rise more than 5%, driven by bad weather wrecking harvests in the world's major growing regions. And then there are the tariffs, the new taxes on imported goods that get passed straight down to you at checkout. By early 2026, tariffs had pushed up the price of coffee, tea, and cocoa by around 12%, seafood by 8%, fruit by 7%, and meat by another 5%, compared to where prices would otherwise have been. There was one bright spot. Egg prices actually tumbled this year, after the bird flu crisis eased, falling sharply from last year's painful highs. But one cheaper item in a cart full of more expensive ones is cold comfort. When the most basic, unavoidable expense in your life keeps climbing, there is no budgeting trick clever enough to fully escape it. Number 8. Tariffs are quietly functioning as a tax on your daily life. Number 7 touched on it, but it deserves its own spotlight, because this is one of the most underappreciated forces hitting your wallet right now, and it's only just getting started. A tariff is, at its core, a tax on imported goods. And here's the part the political slogans leave out. Foreign countries don't pay that tax. You do. When the cost of bringing a product into the United States goes up, importers and retailers don't simply eat the difference out of the goodness of their hearts. They pass it down the chain until it lands on the final price tag, the one you see at the register. We can already measure it in the data. As of early 2026, American consumers were paying noticeably more for a whole range of everyday imported goods specifically because of tariffs, roughly 12% more for coffee, tea, and cocoa, 8% more for fish and seafood, 7% more for fruit, and 5% more for meat, all compared to where those prices would have been without the new trade taxes. And that's just the beginning of the pass-through. Tariffs work their way through the economy in waves. They hit raw materials, then components, then finished goods, then the shelf, often months apart. This is a huge part of why inflation reignited in 2026, instead of fading away like everyone hoped. You can't tax the things people buy and expect prices to fall. And the painful irony is that tariffs are sold as a way to protect American workers, but the worker doesn't feel protected when their grocery bill, their hardware store run, and their kids' back-to-school shopping all quietly cost more. They just feel poorer. A tax is a tax, no matter what you call it. And right now, this one is being paid by you, one inflated receipt at a time. Number 9. Nearly half of Americans now say it takes 6 figures just to feel comfortable. There's a number that captures better than almost any other how far the goalposts of a normal life have moved and how out of reach financial security now feels for ordinary people. When Americans were asked in 2026 how much income they'd need, just to feel financially comfortable, not rich, not wealthy, just comfortable. Nearly half, around 45%, said they'd need to make at least $100,000 a year. A six-figure salary, just to feel okay, and it goes higher from there. About 16% said they'd need $200,000 or more, and 8% said they couldn't feel secure on less than $500,000 a year. Now compare that to reality. The median American household earns nowhere near $100,000. More than half of all U.S. households earn less than $80,000 a year. So you have a country where the income people believe they need to simply stop worrying is roughly double what most of them actually make. That gap between what feels like enough and what people really earn is the financial anxiety of an entire nation, captured in a single statistic. And it's not just public opinion. The Economic Policy Institute calculated that a single person needs about $106,745 a year to live comfortably in 2026. For a couple, that number jumps to around $138,000. For a family with 3 children, it climbs to nearly $280,000. These are not lavish lifestyles. This is the cost of a modest, secure, no-emergencies American life, and for the vast majority of the country, the math simply does not add up. When comfortable requires an income that most people will never see, you don't have an aspirational economy anymore. You have one that's quietly telling the majority of its citizens that the basic deal, work hard, live securely, no longer applies to them. Number 10. American household debt just hit a record $18.8 trillion. When your income won't stretch far enough to cover your life, there's one thing left to reach for, and millions of Americans are reaching for it in record amounts: debt. In the first quarter of 2026, total U.S. household debt climbed to an all-time record of $18.8 trillion, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. $18.8 trillion. It is a number so large it stops meaning anything, so let's bring it down to earth. This is the combined weight of every mortgage, every car loan, every credit card balance, every student loan, and every line of credit that American families are carrying on their backs right now. And it has never been heavier. Now, defenders of the economy will tell you that some of this is normal. Debt tends to grow as the population and the economy grow. That's fair, but it misses the human story underneath the headline. A growing pile of debt is only healthy if incomes are growing fast enough to comfortably service it. And as we've already seen, real incomes have been falling, not rising. That's the dangerous combination: record debt loads stacked on top of shrinking real paychecks. It means a growing share of that $18.8 trillion is being carried by households that are stretched dangerously thin. Borrowing not to get ahead, not to invest in a home or an education that pays off, but simply to keep the lights on and the fridge full. Debt is a tool when you're climbing. It's a trap when you're just surviving. And the data strongly suggests that for more and more American families, it has quietly become the second thing. Number 11. The dream of owning a home is effectively dead for most Americans. For generations, buying a home was the cornerstone of the American dream, the single most reliable way an ordinary family built wealth and put down roots. In 2026, that door has been quietly bolted shut for the majority of the country. The median price of an existing home sold in May 2026 was $429,300. Meanwhile, the average rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage was hovering around 6.5%. Put those two numbers together, and you get a monthly payment that is simply out of reach for most working families. The result is staggering. An estimated 65% of U.S. households cannot afford a median-priced new home in 26. Roughly 88 million households are priced completely out of the market, not struggling to buy, locked out entirely. Here's the cruelest twist: home prices barely rose this year. National prices were up less than 1%. So this isn't a story of a red-hot market running away from buyers. The prices have basically stalled at a brutally high level, and incomes still can't catch up to them. Affordability isn't broken because homes are getting more expensive fast. It's broken because they got so expensive during the boom years, and then mortgage rates doubled, and wages never came close to closing the gap. The damage is already done, and it's just sitting there. Think about what this does to a generation. A young couple doing everything right, both working, saving what little they can, after the bills still can't qualify for the home their own parents bought on a single income. They're stuck renting, watching rent climb too, unable to build the equity that has always been the foundation of middle-class security. When homeownership becomes a privilege reserved for those who already have wealth, the ladder that built the American middle class doesn't just get harder to climb. The bottom rungs disappear completely. Number 12. Americans are drowning in car loans, and the cracks are showing. If a home is out of reach, a car is not optional in most of America. You cannot get to work, drop the kids at school, or buy groceries without one. And the cost of that necessity has turned into a financial emergency that almost nobody is talking about. Americans now owe a record $1.68 trillion in auto loans. The average monthly car payment has climbed to roughly $680, up nearly 40% from where it sat in 2018. Sit with that number for a second. $680 a month, every month, just to keep a vehicle in the driveway. For millions of households, the car payment now rivals or exceeds what previous generations paid for rent. And here's where it gets genuinely scary. People are starting to crack under the weight. Subprime auto loan delinquencies, borrowers with weaker credit falling behind on their car payments, have climbed to their worst levels in more than 3 decades. A record number of borrowers are now more than 60 days behind on what they owe. These aren't reckless spenders buying luxury sports cars. These are working people who bought a reliable car at an inflated price with a high interest rate, and now, with their savings gone and their real wages shrinking, that $680 payment has become the bill they can no longer make. Auto delinquencies are one of the most important early warning signals in the whole economy. Because of what they reveal about priorities, people will sacrifice almost anything before they let the car get repossessed. They need it to earn a living. So when Americans start falling behind on their car loans in record numbers, it tells you they've already cut everything else to the bone and they're still coming up short. This isn't a warning light on the dashboard anymore. The engine is already knocking. Number 13. Credit card delinquencies are the worst in 16 years, and a hidden mountain of debt is growing in the shadows. When the savings are gone, the wages are shrinking, and the car payment is eating the budget alive, there's one last lifeline millions of Americans are leaning on to make it to the next paycheck. Plastic. And that lifeline is starting to fray. Credit card delinquency rates have climbed to their highest level in 16 years. Think about what a credit card delinquency actually means in human terms. It means a household has run out of every other option, savings spent, family tapped out, and is now so far behind that they can't even make the minimum payment on the highest interest debt most people will ever carry. Credit cards routinely charge more than 20% interest. Falling behind on that isn't a lifestyle choice, it's the financial equivalent of a drowning person who has stopped fighting the current. When delinquencies on the most expensive debt in America hit a 16-year high, it tells you the bottom is giving way for a lot of families at once. But here's the part that should really concern you, because it's the debt you can't easily see. A whole new mountain of borrowing has been growing in the shadows. Buy now, pay later. Those tempting little split it into 4 easy payments buttons at online checkout have exploded into a roughly $70 billion business, growing about 20% a year. Economists have started calling it phantom debt, because most of it doesn't even show up on the traditional credit reports the system uses to track how stretched households really are. People are now financing groceries, clothes, and everyday essentials in installments, and surveys show that late payments and missed payments among these users have been climbing steadily. So the official debt numbers, as alarming as they already are, may actually understate the damage. There's a layer of strain underneath the official statistics that the old measuring sticks weren't built to catch. The picture isn't just bad, it's bad in ways we're only beginning to measure. Number 14. 2/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck and have almost no safety net. Add up everything we've covered: the vanished savings, the shrinking real wages, the record debt, the unaffordable homes, the brutal car payments, and you arrive at the single statistic that sums up the lived reality of this economy more honestly than any other. Roughly 2/3 of American consumers are living paycheck to paycheck in 2026. That means the money comes in and the money goes right back out, with little or nothing left over. One missed shift, one surprise medical bill, one broken transmission, and the whole fragile structure threatens to collapse. This isn't a fringe minority struggling at the margins. This is the mainstream American experience, now the default setting for the majority of working households in the wealthiest country on earth. And it gets bleaker, the closer you look. According to survey data, around 76% of Americans have little to no financial safety net at all. Roughly 1 in 5 workers report having literally $0 left over after covering their expenses. Nothing for savings, nothing for emergencies, nothing for the future. Just empty. The generational breakdown is even more alarming. About 72% of Gen Z and 65% of millennials say they're living paycheck to paycheck. The very people who are supposed to be in their prime earning and saving years, building toward homes, families, and retirement, are instead just trying to make it to Friday. This is the quiet catastrophe hiding behind the cheerful economic headlines. You can have a low unemployment rate and a rising stock market and still have a population where 2 out of every 3 people are one bad week away from crisis. A job is supposed to buy you security. For a majority of Americans, it now barely buys survival. And that is perhaps the most damning indictment of all of where this economy has ended up. Number 15. A generation has lost faith, and the experts see the reckoning coming. We've saved the heaviest fact for last, because it's the one that tells you where all of this is heading. It's not just about today's numbers. It's about whether anyone still believes tomorrow will be better. And increasingly, the answer is no. A generation of young Americans is staring at this economy and concluding that the old promises simply don't apply to them anymore. In survey after survey, around 7 in 10 Gen Z and millennial adults now say that real wealth feels completely unattainable, with rising costs pushing them into what researchers describe as survival mode. More than 70% are relying on side hustles and second incomes just to keep up, and the consequences ripple straight into the fabric of American life. Roughly 55% of Gen Z and 52% of millennials say they are delaying major life decisions, marriage, having children, starting a business, going back to school because they simply cannot afford them. An entire generation is putting its life on hold, not out of choice but out of math, and the people whose job it is to read the tea leaves are bracing too. The forecasters at the major banks have spent the year cutting their growth outlooks and openly debating whether the next downturn arrives in months. Moody's puts recession odds near a coin flip. Retail giants are sounding alarms as consumers pull back, and 2026 is already shaping up as a year of reckoning for the retail sector. Established, iconic names sliding toward bankruptcy as shoppers run out of room in their budgets. Moody's has slapped a negative outlook on the entire retail industry. As one chief economist at a major bank put it, at this point you either get a weak economy or you get a deep recession. There's no painless way out of the corner we've backed ourselves into. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are watching is not a passing storm. It is a long, grinding decline, the slow unwinding of a middle-class promise that took generations to build and decades of reckless decisions to undo. The savings are gone. The debt is at record highs. Wages can't keep up. Homes are out of reach. And a generation has stopped believing the system will ever work for them. This is not the bottom. This is the part of the story where the cracks become visible to everyone. And the American people can already feel it in their bones. So now we want to hear from you. Can you feel it too? Is your own paycheck telling you the same story? These numbers are telling us. Drop a comment below and let us know what you're seeing where you live, because the official statistics never capture the whole truth, but you do. If this video opened your eyes, share it with your friends and family so they can see what's really going on. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because the next chapter of this story is being written right now and you're going to want to be here when it is. Thank you for watching.